The forgotten meals of survival. You know, sometimes a recipe isn't just a recipe. Today, we're digging into a list of 25 meals that tell a really profound story about American life. It's a story about resilience, about dignity, and, well, what it truly means to survive. So, let's get right into it. So, let's be super clear about this from the get-go. This is not a list for foodies, okay? These are not recipes you're going to find for your next dinner party. No. As the source material points out, these were solutions. That's the best word for it. They were designed to feed people who were eating alone, people stretching a social security check across 30 long days and just praying the math worked out. To really get the world these meals came from, just look at this number. $11. That's it. In 1987, a retired steel worker in Pittsburgh lived on that for an entire week. Think about that. He ate the same one-pot meal every single night for 3 straight years. And get this, his doctor said his blood work was actually better than most guys half his age. And yeah, you guessed it. That meal, it's on this list. All right, so let's stick with that steelworker for a minute. His story really gets to the heart of what these meals are all about. They weren't just food. They were a complete strategy for survival, all cooked up in a single pot. So what was this miracle meal he ate every night? Well, it was called Depression Stew. It's number 4 on the original list, and honestly, the name kind of tells you everything you need to know about where it came from, right? This was a recipe born purely from necessity, passed down from his mom who learned it during the Great Depression. It was a recipe that basically said, hey, no matter how bad things get, you are gonna eat tonight. And just look at how simple these ingredients are. Seriously, that's it. Ground beef, a can of tomatoes, a can of corn, a couple of potatoes, a little water, salt, pepper. The potatoes thicken the broth, the corn adds sweetness, the tomatoes give it some acid, and the ground beef, even the cheapest kind you could find, turns it into a real meal that actually sustains you. I mean, a single pot of this stuff could last for 4 days. It cost less than $5 to make, and it kept a man alive and independent until he was 91 years old. That's incredible. You know, these meals also solved another really critical problem. What do you do when the money is just gone, and the pantry is almost completely empty? Well, that's where some of the most ingenious recipes on this list come from. Okay, let's take meal number 25 on the list, for example. Tomato and bread soup. All you needed was like half a loaf of stale bread, a can of tomatoes, maybe a clove of garlic, and some water. That's it. You just simmer it for about 20 minutes, and that stale bread just dissolves and turns into this thick, warming, almost porridge-like stew. And this quote, man, it just captures the spirit of it perfectly. I have almost nothing left in the cupboard, and I am still going to eat well tonight. You see, this wasn't a meal of defeat. Not at all. It was an act of pure defiance. It was all about creating comfort and real sustenance from virtually nothing. It was the taste of a grandmother's kitchen in Tuscany, but made in a tenement in New York. And here's the wild part, the real kicker. It's this contrast, right? Today, modern food writers have rediscovered this dish. They give it a fancy name, they call it ribollita, and they'll charge you $18 a bowl for it in some Manhattan restaurant. But your grandmother, she just called it supper. Okay, but this is where the story takes a turn and gets so much deeper. Because these one-pot meals, they weren't just about solving the problem of an empty stomach. They were actually engineered to solve the silent, kind of invisible problems that come with aging alone. So, what problem do these meals really solve? What are we actually talking about here? The source material suggests the answer, well, it has very little to do with food at all. They solved these kinds of challenges. The loneliness of a kitchen that's just too quiet, a kitchen that used to be full of noise and people. The physical exhaustion when your back hurts and just the idea of washing 3 separate pans makes you want to skip dinner entirely. Or that strange kind of grief you feel when you have to cut a recipe in half because the person you always shared it with is gone. And that's really what it all boils down to. The true genius of these meals wasn't the flavor profile. It wasn't some fancy culinary technique. It was accessibility. The single most important ingredient was the simple fact that someone, tired and alone, could actually make it. With aching hands, with a heavy heart, you could still do it. The meal met you exactly where you were. And you know, sometimes these meals did even more than that. The source tells this wonderful story about a widow in Nebraska who would make tuna noodle pot. She started adding crushed potato chips on top to give it some crunch. Well, her neighbors started bringing her bags of chips. And then they started bringing their own bowls. And just like that, a simple one-pot meal had accidentally cured loneliness. But it raises a pretty big question, right? If these meals are so brilliant, so important, why have so many of them been forgotten? Well, the answer, maybe unsurprisingly, really just comes down to money. Yeah, this chart pretty much explains the whole thing. The basic ingredients for these survival meals. We're talking dried beans, potatoes, onions, cabbage. They have almost zero profit margin. I mean, nobody has brand loyalty to a bag of lentils, you know? The real money, the big money, is in branded, processed, frozen dinners, which, by the way, often have way less nutrition than a simple bowl of bean soup that costs maybe 35 cents to make. And this is the cruel, kind of twisted irony at the heart of this whole thing. The very foods that are cheap, nutritious, and accessible, the exact foods that allow people to stay alive and maintain their independence, are the ones the modern food industry has absolutely zero financial incentive to promote. Okay, so let's try to bring this all together. What have we learned? These meals are so much more than just food. They represent a legacy of human dignity, of resilience, of finding a way to care for yourself when the world makes it really easy to just stop trying. And honestly, there is no better example of this than the #1 meal on the list, good old chicken soup. I mean, think about it. Every single culture has its own version. Every generation passes it down. It is simply the most basic, nourishing, and healing meal that human beings have ever invented. And now, think about what happens when you make it just for yourself, when you're alone in a quiet kitchen. That simple act of cooking, it becomes this incredibly profound statement. It's a connection to every single person who ever took care of you. And it's a reminder, it's you telling yourself that you are still worth the trouble of cooking.
So when you really get down to it, these are the true unspoken ingredients in every single one of these recipes. Yeah, they all start with necessity, but they're built with resilience, they're seasoned with memory, and they are always served with a huge helping of human dignity.
So I'm going to leave you with the same challenge that the source material ends with. Make one of these meals this week: the potato soup, the lentil stew, maybe even the depression stew. And then sit down at a table by yourself or with someone you love and just eat it slowly. Because it was never just about being cheap. It was about staying alive. And it was about staying human.